Imagine a world where men stepped up and answered God's call to reach their full potential. Imagine a world where men put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where men lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christian men from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and unapologetically Christian. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Dr. Slover. Thanks for having me on.
It's really good to see you. It's been a minute. How long has it been? 4 years?
So I graduated in December of 2019. I think the last year I was on campus though was spring of 2018. So,
Gosh,
yeah,
don't blink,
yeah,
man. Time goes way
I
too
know.
fast.
Yep.
My guest today is Josh Roberts. I met Josh when he was a student of mine at Grand Canyon University multiple times, I might add. Well, it's something that we'll have to talk about. One of the things that always struck me about Josh was the energy and enthusiasm with which he lived life. Said differently, he always seemed genuinely excited to be in class, and I never saw him in a bad mood. After earning his bachelor's degree in business administration and management, Josh went on to serve in multiple roles for First Interstate, an organization that provides banking and wealth management services. And today he works as a landowner onboarding specialist for Land Trust in Bozeman, Montana, Big Sky country.
That's
And
right.
Josh has been married to his lovely wife, Kenya, for 3 years. No kids yet, but kids on the way, Josh?
That's right, Lord willing. So, yeah,
if
hopefully
I
one
can
day soon.
if I can offer some unsolicited commentary about being a parent, it's fun and funny, and every cliche that has ever been written or said. But I'll tell you this: once you fall in love with your kid, you realize our language is too primitive to adequately describe that love,
Hmm.
which is why we defer to cliche.
Hmm.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in as a landowner onboarding specialist. I'm really intrigued as to
Yeah.
what that is exactly. So talk about your background and bring us to present day.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, we'll get to land trust in a second. Obviously, super grateful for a job that I love, but yeah, to kind of give you some insight just into my story. I guess first off, super thankful for how you just described me. I'm sure you see a lot of different students, just in your time. And so to even remember that and get that reading for me, that means a lot. So thanks for that
You're welcome.
description. And yeah, looking back, just to kind of give you a quick glimpse into my faith story, to start off, I was born and raised in a Christian home. Again, sometimes that sounds like a cliche, but super grateful just for the role my parents played in exposing me early to the gospel. And it was awesome getting to grow up in the same church, my whole life. And so seeing that community, and getting to live like that was super awesome. But one nice thing with that too is, I felt like my faith was my own from a very young age. And again, I think um, that's a credit to the Lord, obviously, by His grace, and then also just by Him giving me parents that cared enough to take me to church every Sunday, to give me a chance to hear what it looks like to be a Christian, and what the gospel means. And so, there's moments where I'm like, dang it, I wish I knew the date that I became a Christian. I wish I would have taken a note of that. But even so, at a young age, I knew what I was doing. I was confessing my sins to Jesus, and asking Him to be Lord over my life. And so, from there, even today, I just have to say, there's nothing that I can do to save myself. It's by His grace that I've been saved. And I try to live with faith in that, every day. Not perfect by any means, in that, but I'm definitely a recovering legalist. So I'm or someone or what is the right word, right phrase, but legalism, I guess. I want to earn it. There's every part of my personality wants to earn it. And so, that's kind of been a story, my whole life growing up since giving my life to Christ is, wanting to lean on his finished work, not any work that I can do. So that's kind of the start there. Again, growing up, kind of two big things for me, Dr. Slover, that stick out. Number one, just kind of the importance of, reputation, or just kind of my perception of how others view me. You can ask my parents growing up. They, at home, I was kind of a terror. Lots of spankings and stuff like that. Lots of discipline, which I'm thankful. My parents loved me enough to spank me. But in school, in public settings, I was so concerned with my reputation that I wanted to do things right. And so, you can ask my parents when they would go to parent teacher conferences, they'd be dreading, what the teacher would say. And then the teacher would give them this great gold star report, and they're like, our kid is Josh Roberts, right? You have the right kid, right? And so again, I think it's interesting, just how behavior can be different at home versus in a public setting. But that was who I am, or who I was. I was really concerned with how other people viewed me, and I wanted to appear like I had it all together. And so, again, not necessarily a bad thing, at the base level, but, moving into high school, there was some struggles that I kind of ran into, that made it really difficult to be vulnerable with people, because I was so concerned with my reputation, not wanting to share that I didn't have it all together. And so that was something that I definitely had to work through. I think what is cool though, in all of that, the other kind of big thing that is a huge part of my story is just sports, and specifically basketball. I got to listen to a couple of the other episodes, and it was cool hearing, that you've had some coaches on and stuff like that. And so, for me, I've always loved the game. And I think in some ways basketball was an idol. But one neat thing though is, I felt a good way to connect my faith to sports was just like playing for God's glory. And that sports was a good way for me to tie my faith into what I was doing on the court. And so, again, it was easy to make it an idol. But it was also, an easy way for me to have some purpose to my play there. So, but yeah, that being said, I did derive a lot of my identity from sports. And so, I look back as lots of pivotal moments, but look back on a pivotal moment, my senior year of high school, when that final buzzer sounded, for high school basketball. It's like, whoa, like who am I now, and so, trying to navigate that after, life after competitive basketball, that was a little bit of a struggle and a big loss, and a big hit to my identity, because I didn't really know who I was, apart from basketball there. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the growing up side of things. What's cool is, another pivotal moment is just GCU, getting to go to Grand Canyon. I do have a funny story, in the search for GCU. This probably makes me sound like a little bit of a drama queen, but I was so concerned with, where does God want me to go after high school? What am I going to do? I have no idea what I want to do with my life. And so again, drama queen here, but I'm like, I'm going to die before college starts. I can't see myself anywhere. I have a feeling that I'm just going to die, after high school. And so again, how's that for dramatic right there? You like that?
A little bit.
So, yeah, very dramatic.
No judgment. This is a judgment-free zone, Josh.
Yeah. But I'm like, I couldn't see myself anywhere. So of course I'm like, all right, I'm going to die. So hopefully that doesn't sound too morbid there, but, it was
Can
awesome. I ended up taking.
Real quick.
Yeah, please.
You said something there that I want to touch on. That's really important and simultaneously surprising. And that's this idea that when we have these big life transitions, we actually go through a grieving process that we do not expect to go through. And that's what you, at least I think that's what you were getting at when the final buzzer sounded on your last basketball game in high school. You had devoted so much of your life to, and it was a fundamental or foundational part of your identity. And then it's just like,
Right.
well, who am I now? How are you able to navigate that process of grieving?
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of my testimony is just, in that moment of grieving, the Lord was really able to show himself to me and say, hey, your identity is not in your identity is not in your reputation. It's not, certainly not in, your skills as a basketball player. um, and he was able to show me, no, your identity is in me, as a child of Christ. And so that was a big switch, for me. And I didn't, of course, growing up in a Christian home, it's like, of course I know that, my identity is in Christ, but to actually tangibly feel that after going through a loss like that, of losing your identity, your perceived identity in basketball, that was a big shift for me. So, yep.
So bringing it closer to present day, you were searching for a college, and then you were able to land on Grand Canyon. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah. Well, again, back to being a drama queen, I'm like, what am I going to do? I visit GCU. I did the Discover trip, and so I got to spend a night on campus. And this is one moment where I really just attribute, a peace that passes understanding in my life, kind of a real tangible experience of that, of waking up on campus and being like, man, I kind of don't want to leave, And so that was the moment that I was like, all right, I'm gonna go to GCU. And so that was exciting to make that decision. And obviously a big decision because, I'm leaving the house that I grew up, my entire life in. I'm leaving the church family that I grew up in. I'd gone to the same, high school or same school, K through 12. And so big change, to leave Colorado where I'm from, and go to Phoenix. So, but again, I look back on my time at GCU and just like, man, what a home run, so I'm really glad that I ended up there. I got to be a tour guide on campus, which was fun. It's kind of interesting as an introvert, interesting role to choose as an introvert, telling people about GCU, but it was pretty easy for me, because I didn't really have to lie about anything. I could just say, hey, I love GCU and really share my experience. And I think that's what made being a tour guide fun. So
that's surprising to me. I would have never pegged you as an introvert. I mean, we had multiple classes together, and you were always so attentive and conscientious and forthcoming with answers to questions. So that's somewhat surprising. And what was also surprising is seeing you taking my classes multiple times. I mean, what were you thinking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm really thankful that I did get to take your classes, and part of that business management degree, something I would always say on when giving people tours or telling people about my experiences, like business management is kind of code word for I'm not sure what I want to do yet with my life. And so it was cool, getting to be in your classes. And I think I ended up taking a servant leadership class as well. I don't think you taught that one, but that was a big one for me as well, that kind of taught a lot of valuable lessons into kind of professional life for me. So I'm glad I chose business management.
And now you're in professional life. You served in multiple roles with First Interstate. Now you're with Land Trust. Yep. How have you been able to, if at all, integrate your faith to your work? Because, the GCU environment, that allowed for that. It was open and encouraged in many ways in various settings at the university level. So have you been able to integrate your faith with your work?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, yes. It kind of goes back to just the, kind of big moments of my life of, that idea of, either living for my reputation or trying to appear super, like I have it all together. Big thing that, that my dad has always been really helpful in and encouraging me on and helping me, or I guess just giving me wisdom is just this idea of audience of one. I was able to play my sports with an audience of one. That was for the Lord. And then in professional life, I feel like what I'm doing, even though I'm not necessarily a missionary overseas, I feel like my work is valuable for the kingdom because of how I'm doing my work. And I think again, that, the fact that I'm making the decision to do the daily tasks, however menial, for God's glory. And so that's been a big part of how I've been integrating my faith is even in the stuff that's not necessarily super exciting, being willing to say, hey, I'm doing this for the Lord. And I think that gives me a lot of purpose as well. Working at the bank, learned a lot of lessons there. And then now working at Land Trust as well. Being able to tie that purpose of, hey, I'm working for an audience of one. That gives me a higher sense of value on what I'm doing. So, yeah.
You referenced in many ways, and not to also be overly dramatic, but you referenced when you were in high school that you kind of lived a bit of a double life in many ways, where you're self-described terror at home, and yet out in public, you were this paragon of virtue in many ways. So much so that your parents didn't know what to expect whenever they ended up having meetings with your teachers. Have you been able to create more alignment in your life today, where your presentation of who you are, your identity at home, is now consistent with what you put off to the world?
Yeah, I think I definitely don't have it all together by any means. I think in some ways that, I have learned to be vulnerable. There's some big experiences just growing up. After GCU, got to go to camp. That's where I met my wife Kenya, which is awesome. We were counselors there. That community really fostered that idea of vulnerability and kind of leading out of your weakness. And so that was a big shift for me. And I think, again, not doing it perfectly by any means now, but kind of living out of this idea of, okay, I don't have it all together. And my works are filthy rags compared to what Christ has done for me. And and so being able to make that connection now and kind of walk out of that vulnerability has helped me kind of with that kind of living out of the double life there, if that makes sense.
It does. And vulnerability is an interesting concept. Now, if you follow Brené Brown's work, she's like the preeminent person in the world right now on all things vulnerability.
Okay.
And she comes at it from this angle that I happen to agree with in many respects, that vulnerability isn't weakness. That vulnerability and being able to be vulnerable with other people is actually strength in action, because it requires courage to be able to put ourselves out there, because quite frankly, we don't know what the person we're being vulnerable with is going to do with our vulnerability.
Right.
What's your general sense on that? Because you had said living out of weakness, where she might argue you were actually living out of a position of strength by being willing to communicate your weakness. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I would get too bogged down with the the terminology there, at least for me, but, I think my weakness or struggles is kind of what I'm referring to. It does take courage, I guess, to say that I don't have it all together. And so, I kind of go back to, um, you know, 2 Corinthians 12, where it talks about just I will boast all the more in my weakness. And so, God's power is on full display when He's using me in my weakness. And so that's kind of how I would approach that. And again, it's by God's grace and His strength that I'm able to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable is not fun, especially for me, who still values reputation and not wanting to let people down, or not wanting people to to think poorly of me because I struggle with something. And so I think that's how I would respond to that. Not that I disagree with her I guess her description of that, but that's kind of how I feel. So
How I'm internalizing what you just described is approaching situations that are, first off, uncomfortable, but being willing to push through the discomfort by taking a position of humility and courage. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Yep.
How have you learned to do that?
Yeah, well, I think back to camp, being in a really sweet community of, there's not a whole lot of flashiness going on. We're serving campers. We're not getting paid very much. We're up there for long numbers of days doing work up there, and so it was really neat being in that setting, getting to serve together, and then also just really getting to be in that community of good conversations, good Bible studies, which led to those moments of vulnerability. And so I think that was a huge key. And then even just like, not that I'm some expert in marriage now, but 3 years though, we're 3 years in. So yeah. So glory to God on that. But just seeing the way Kenya loves me, despite my flaws, which are many, that's been a really good lesson, just kind of seeing Christ in her. And so, I wouldn't want her to love me without knowing the full me, I guess. And so, that's been another big learning experience for me, is just being vulnerable with her, and then getting to watch my expectations change of how I would expect her to react, and see her love me like Christ loves me. So, because I think that's the lie with vulnerability. Cultures like, you can't share what's really going on. You can't be real with people. You can't be vulnerable, because if you are, then they will think differently of you. They will think more, more poorly of you. And I think that's a lie that the enemy tries to leverage so that you'll keep it in the dark. And so I think if you can, a truth that's been helpful for me is, if I can get that information, the whatever I'm holding inside, into the light, that's God's territory. If I'm keeping it in the dark, I'm still giving Satan a foothold over that, with that information. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, that's so good. And speaking of culture, for the last 4 decades, there's been an attack on men. And you're at an age now where you've had to navigate, part of it, and you're not necessarily on the other side in terms of like where I am, and firmly in middle age, and so you're closer to what you had to navigate in junior high and high school than not. Given some of the cultural dynamics above and beyond the communicating vulnerability, how were you able to navigate a culture that is increasingly anti-God? How are you able to show up as a better version of yourself to glorify him rather than following the dictates of culture?
Yeah, yeah. I think I think first and foremost, I just have to confess that it's easy for me to despair over, certain things, and where it's like, ah, dang it, and like just getting discouraged about, different things like that, where it's like, man, being a man is difficult, and culture is not really helping you out either. And so, I just have to confess that. And I'm thankful for people in my life that can encourage me and help me not be discouraged about that kind of thing. But I think a big thing for me, though, in the midst of that despair, something that my dad always says is just the importance of faithfulness over time. And you said it in your question, but just, you got to show up every day. And I think um, and I'm preaching to myself here, but, if I'm a man and I don't want culture to be, continually more anti-God, I need to continue showing up, and I need to continue doing my work for his glory. And I can't stop. I need to not stop doing that. I need to be faithful in that mission. And I think the Lord can use that faithfulness over time. And hopefully that will be an encouragement to somebody else to be faithful, to keep pressing on. But yeah, it's hard. And again, like I said, it's easy for me to despair. And I think that's why I need community in my life to encourage me to keep showing up, I guess. So,
Yeah. Has your faith in God ever wavered?
um, I don't think, I don't think it's ever wavered in terms of like what I know. Again, like we've talked about already, growing up in a Christian home, I know I know the truth. I know all the right answers. I think living out my faith, there's been those moments where I've kind of let those periods of despair, I guess, win a little bit, where it's like, it is difficult to show up, or it's difficult to be encouraged, or it's difficult to open my Bible and read something that I've read every like my entire life. And so, yeah, I think my knowledge of the truth hasn't wavered. I think in certain moments, though, it's been difficult to let my faith be what I guess the strongest voice in me. So,
Got it.
yeah.
Got it. So when you talk about God, what do you talk about?
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a good question. I think, um, in the I guess in my normal conversations, or just like when I'm thinking about him, um, I think of him as my father, and one that loves you no matter what, that loved you enough to send his son to die for you. I think that's a big one. I'm trying to think, in terms of like daily conversations. I don't have them all the time with coworkers or with just people in my non-Christian circles, but he's not he's not just this entity that's full of wrath, and it's all wrath, and he's a bad God because bad things happen in the world. It's not that. I try to talk about his love and justice, and how both of those things work together, to make the gospel story. I think God's love would be less on display if he wasn't fully just, and I think his justice wouldn't be as fully on display if it wasn't for his love. So I think those two facets of his character are pretty critical. I feel like, to my view of God, is both his love and justice. So I don't know if that answers that question. I'm not entirely sure, and maybe I need to work on that. Just how I talk to God, how I talk about God. So
It does. Well, I wanted to ask a follow-up to that. And if you were counseling someone your age, actually, let me start that question over. If you were counseling someone my age or older who maybe grew up in an environment where talking about God was all fire and brimstone, and when
yeah,
anyone asked one of us a question, we took liberties in opening the religious fire hose on you. Like if you were to give, and I don't want to be stereotypical in terms of older generations, but the generations are behave differently when it comes to faith. What advice would you give me to say, you know what, Ed, maybe that's a little off-putting to take those liberties, and like finish that sentence?
yeah, yeah. I feel like it's off-putting when I guess you use the gospel to kind of serve your own needs, in terms of trying to convert somebody, or when you're using the gospel to like, drive home a point maybe. And I don't think that's always the case. I think, um, there is truth to, the fact that there is a heaven and a hell, and that, there is, separation from God eternally is hell. And, whether there's a lake of fire or fire and brimstone, whatever that looks like, I think that is a real place. I don't want to deny that. But again, I don't think using that as a tactic to, I guess, develop a relationship with Christ. I don't think I like that tactic. And so, I'd encourage you to, as an older man, to, try to drive home the points of, just what relationship with God looks like. And again, back to his love and justice, in order for God to be just, there had to be an atonement for sin. He can't be perfect and have this imperfect, he can't have imperfection with his perfection. And so, there had to be something to atone for that. And so, that's where his love comes in. It's not us that has to pay that price. It's Jesus that gets to, or that it's Jesus that was willing to pay that price for us, so that we could be perfect, despite our imperfection. And, again, though, it doesn't stop there. He didn't stay dead. We worship a risen Savior. And then number two, there's a choice. We can choose to accept that free gift of salvation, or we can choose to continue living life with, on our own terms, and not accept it. And then again, there's going to be punishment for that. But again, I don't think using hell as a way to drive home a point is the best way. I think the full story is the best way. So I don't know. Do you agree with that? I mean, any advice on how to communicate that better? I don't know.
I love that answer, because it really very much aligns with my perspective, which is, if you get the question, answer the question. So if you have someone who is struggling in their faith walk or is a non-believer, and they engage you in conversation, it seems like I would want to create enough curiosity to get the next question, right? Rather than just taking liberties. And Josh, we take liberties all the time in conversations. Yeah. But what if we just took a step back and said, when we get the question, answer the question enough to encourage additional curiosity. And then you're not dealing with a monologue, you're dealing with a dialogue at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what's your impression on sort of that approach?
Yeah. I mean, I think back to my own faith, starting off, I'm glad I was able to dialogue with it and figure it out for myself. Again, being exposed early to Christ, I felt like I was able to do that. It wasn't somebody just saying you have to do this. And I look back at pivotal people in my life, and my grandpa on my dad's side, if I'm remembering the story correctly, it was a high school janitor that shared his faith with my grandpa. And it's like, that there was no, I wasn't there, but there was no, I don't know what the right word is there, but I'm sure there was a conversation there that piqued my grandpa's interest enough to warrant further conversation. And so, I don't know. I think it's, if we can get to that point where we're having conversation with people, you can kind of talk through some of those spots that are harder for people to understand. So,
yeah, love it. Love it. So one last question for you, with the preface that one of the things we've seen in society and our culture is the absence of strong principled Christian fathers. And you've referenced your dad multiple times during this conversation, and now your granddad. If you had to describe the significance of the roles the men in your life have played, how would you describe that?
Yeah, so pivotal, so pivotal. I think it's hard to adequately describe the impact that the men in my life have had on me. But I think just back to just faithfulness over time. There are multiple times where, number one, dad could have chosen to not spend the 45 minutes to spank me, because I would put up a fight. I would be like, no, I'm going to try to wait this out. And, he could have easily called it quits and been like, nope, yeah, I'm not going to spank him. But, I look back on those moments and he's like, he stuck with me that entire, however long I was putting up the fight. He'd spank me, and then we would be, he would tell me he loved me. And so like that's that kind of stuff where it's like willing to stick by my side, and not just take the easy way out. I think that's something I'm super grateful for. I think also just when I think of people who are my biggest fans, obviously it is my family. I love the women in my life as well, but my dad never missed a game. He had to be at every game to support me. And I knew that no matter how I did on the court, that he was going to be proud of me, and that I was still going to be his favorite player. So even just simple stuff like that, I look back on and I'm just super grateful for. It kind of gets me thinking. One of the reasons I like taking your class, Dr. Slover, is every fall semester, and you'd always have in one of your slides just a reference to your father, and then you had lost him, but in that you chose to obviously take that time to honor him, and also challenge each of your students to call your dad and make sure that they know that you love them. And so I always took advantage of that. And so just I think if I look back on that, back to your initial question, it's so pivotal, and they got to know that, and so it's I'm very grateful for their love for me in my life. So.
That's
Thank
great.
you for doing that. Yeah, appreciate you doing that, because it's easy to, again, back to time flying. It's easy to let time fly, and then when was the last time I talked to my dad? And is there going to be a moment where this is the last time I get to talk to my dad? And so taking advantage of those moments and making sure that they know that they're loved is important, because they've had a big impact on my life. So
yeah, no doubt about it. I'm so happy to not only hear of the positive impact he had in your life, or he has had and will continue have in your life, but your willingness to share that, because you're going to be a dad one day, and now you have something to model after. And if you end up having a son or multiple sons, you're gonna pour into their life and allow them to show up differently and better for themselves, so they show up better for the people that they let into their world, and that's transformative. So thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation today. Would you mind praying us out?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, for sure. All right, Father God, thank you so much just for your love for us. Thanks for Dr. Slover and just his intentionality to have these conversations, and to really be intentional to give you the credit, Lord. Thank you that you are at the center of it all, that you are worthy of the glory. Father, I pray for just both of us as we kind of leave this call, that you would help us to live just with an audience of one. Thank you that you are watching. I just pray that we would find great purpose and value in whatever we find ourselves doing, because we're doing it for you, Lord. And I just pray that you would be glorified by what we do, Lord. So we love you so much. Again, we're grateful for your son, Jesus. And I just pray that you just give us the rest of the day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All
Josh,
right.
Thanks again for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again for having me on, Dr. Silver. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. God bless.
All right. You too.
You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.